guys. Well, let's get started. First of all, thank you for coming out to the kickoff for the Spring 2019 Philosophy and Religion Lecture Series, Contemporary Issues in Philosophy and Religion Lecture Series. This has been a lecture series, for as long as I've been teaching here in the Spring 2016. So I'm not exactly sure to what extent this has been around, but I'm very thankful for it. Typically what happens is throughout the course of the semester, different faculty member from the philosophy department, from the religion department, or friendly departments around campus will present on something personal to them relative to their academic interests. So you have a lot of faculty members and they teach certain classes and they have to hit certain basic essential class material, given the intro class or an upper level class. But this is an excuse for them to really kind of, myself included, really kind of nerd out and sort of just say, hey, this is the kind of stuff that I'm into in my own academic time, and surely it spill over into some of my classes, but now we can take a real in-depth look at it. So I'm very thankful for that. It's a wonderful reason to come out here and give a lecture. Typically I'm the closer. Typically I close out the lecture series. This semester I am opening it in late January, early in the semester. So I applaud y'all for being out here for this extracurricular opportunity so early in the semester when it seems like, oh, I don't got to worry about grades for months. Here you are out here, so I appreciate that. Well, without any further ado, I'll get into it, guys. This is, first of all, my name is Professor Jeff Manzi. I teach philosophy here at Richland College. I'm a permanent full-time faculty member, and I am, again, thrilled to be here. Now, today's Contemporary Issues in Philosophy and Religion lecture is going to be on notions of freedom, specifically as found in Jean-Luc Nancy, who is a contemporary thinker. What I want to do in this lecture is the following. I would like to, hey, what's up, y'all? I would like to trace out what traditional Western philosophy has understood freedom to be very briefly before introducing these new alternative, I would say radical, arguably controversial understandings of freedom relative to our own individual or personal freedom. Now, I'm going to begin with somebody named Hegel, just to set the context, sort of like a baseline for comparison, and then I'll be looking at Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and finally Jean-Luc Nancy for modifications and challenges of what freedom once meant versus what it might now mean. And a lot of these thinkers, again, they're contemporary 20th century people. They've been around. They were around when I was born. This is kind of cutting edge stuff. This is what philosophy is looking like right now in certain corners. So, okay, without further ado, you see that first slide up there. I rather like this image. I used this slide in a previous presentation. And by the way, you can find all of the Contemporary Issues lectures posted online, me as well as several of my colleagues. If you go to LaCroix Center, you guys know the LaCroix Center. We have it on this very campus. You don't have to literally go there, mind you. If you go there and knock on the door and say, I want to see the lecture series, they're not going to know what you're talking about. But, oh, I like that. However, hey, if you navigate your browser there to the LaCroix website, search philosophy, you'll find them all. All right, but anyways, yeah, look at this little guy here. There's an apple, and the apple says, I'm an apple. Provides itself with its identity, and then it pauses like, oh, I'm an apple. And then the apple, the magical talking apple, says to himself or herself, why am I an apple? Why am I an apple? I appreciate that because this, in essence, is what freedom is relative to these existential thinkers. It's going to have to do with the ability to question what you are and pursue what you would like to be. But how does that make any sense relative to our tradition? That's what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, let me hear that next one or see that next one. Okay, yeah, so here we have forms of freedom. I threw this up here really quick to give a brief sort of distinction made, sort of a dichotomy here. Now, up there you have essential freedom. Oh, I'm sorry, down there you have essential freedom, and that is what I'm referring to as the tradition in the West. So some elements of essential freedom, essence freedom. Freedom of being, freedom to think, freedom to plan, and freedom to hope. So essential being operates in the following way. There is an essence given to this world. There's an essence to what you are. There's a particular, we'll just say, plan in place. And that human beings are slowly emancipating themselves from their own ignorance, such that we can arrive at a point where we have something like perfect knowledge. I'm paraphrasing Hegel here, who's going to be our representative of essential freedom. It's the kind of freedom that seems, by comparison to existential, somewhat limited. So you see there, existential freedom, it says, yes, freedom of doing, and freedom to pursue tangible goals. Suffice it to say that your freedom is going to be dependent on to the degree to which you are able to pursue your own goals, to make your own choices, and then live in accordance with them freely, voluntarily. Now, more specifically, this presentation is going to get a little abstract. We're going to talk about what being is, with a capital B, like beingness. We're going to talk about what beingness is and what it has to do with how a human being bees, how we are, the way we is, this kind of thing. How does that relate to freedom of this more essential sort? I will discuss that. And then we'll end with this thinker, Jean-Luc Nancy. Jean-Luc Nancy teaches in California right now. He's alive today. In fact, he's Skyping in. Joking. He won't take my calls. Nonetheless, we'll be talking about his final word on the matter. So next slide, please. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a picture of me when I graduated college. No, this is Hegel. Hegel is a relatively late modern thinker. That's what he looks like. Let's hit that slide. So he says something interesting here. He says, on the topic of freedom, and Hegel's known to speak widely on this topic, he writes, can I take this out? No, let me take it. I want to walk around like a stand-up comic. The history of the world is nothing than the progression of the consciousness toward freedom. The consciousness is key there. Here is, in a nutshell, what Hegel understands freedom to be. What I would argue the Western tradition kind of reaches its apex, reaches its crest in this guy, Hegel. Hegel believes in the following. He believes that, evolutionarily speaking, the history of the world is really the history of the human being coming to an awareness of knowledge or truth. And so, over the course of, and I mean big picture here, over the course of centuries, hundreds and hundreds of years, he argues for this idea of progress. That human beings, humanity as a whole, is slowly working towards getting to a point where we are completely free, which means we've progressed to the point of absolute completion. Hegel wants to argue that there is a very set standard for freedom. And again, he ties it to consciousness here. It's more like self-consciousness, conscious awareness. Hegel's idea is that, and it's a rather extreme one, every single tragedy we've endured as a species, every single conflict, every major war where we've lost countless lives, all of that is justified in the name of progress. To get to the point, it's all like, you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. Bad things had to happen, struggle had to happen, people had to die in droves for consciousness to progress, for us to evolve, to become more rational, to increase our rational capacities, to really refine them to the point where what we believe is what is true. That's freedom for Hegel. To the point where our beliefs are in perfect harmony with what actually is, what's real, truth with a capital T. And when all of our knowledge is absolutely true in that sense, then we're fully free, then our consciousness has refined itself. And we're free to live as that kind of being. That's freedom. It's freedom in a very, I would say, general way, because it's looking at the entire scope, the entire trajectory of history from the beginning of man till now. And it's saying, yeah, this is all destiny. This is all what's supposed to happen. Bad things have to happen for us to enhance, for us to evolve. And maybe you could ask yourself that in your life. Maybe you endured tragedy and you came out the other side of it, I don't know, what you might consider to be better or more intelligent, more enlightened, more refined. But of course, you might have also endured a tragedy and you thought to yourself, well, maybe this will break me. maybe there's nothing to be gleaned here. There's no progress being made. This is just sad. Hey, what's going on, Richland? And so, yeah, for somebody like Hegel then, freedom is paramount. Freedom is what's most important. What's less important are individual lives. Freedom almost for its own sake. Hegel wants freedom in a very abstract way for the species on the grandest possible scales. But what gets lost in the shuffle is individual freedom. Because to be clear, Hegel says, listen, bad things are going to happen, people are going to die, you are going to, individually, some of you may lose your freedom permanently, by being casualties of history. And yet, he says that's okay because it's for the sake of freedom. As you might imagine, some of the more individualist types of thinkers, a la the existentialists, had a big problem with this. To truncate individual life for the sake of some broader vision, some idea of progress seems almost evil, almost wrong. At the very least, I'm going to say this. It's inconsistent with what freedom might actually be. Can I get the next slide, please? Thanks. Okay, so now this is, maybe you haven't heard of Hegel, but you've heard of this guy. Anybody ever hear of him? Christopher Hutchins, ringing any bells? Really? Oh yeah, okay, we got somebody, thank you. Yeah, something of a more public intellectual. Hutchins, say what you will about whether or not you agree with his positions, does have something to say on Hegel. And he summarizes Hegel rather nicely. He says, Hegel said that history was the story of freedom becoming conscious of itself. It's so annoying. Anyways, so freedom becoming conscious of itself. That's what people think Hegel has said. And they're not wrong. Hutchins, he's right here. What I'm referring to as sort of the evolutionary progress of rational faculty, Hegel would say, no, that's us becoming more free. That's what we're emancipating ourselves from ignorance. We're emancipating ourselves from belief, mythological, intuitive understandings of things to absolute knowledge. So the story of human history, he says, is the story of freedom. And Hegel does believe history ends. He says there's an end to history. The end of history is when we're all free. The end of history is when freedom has become aware of itself. Now, what does that mean? What is freedom? How does freedom become aware of itself? Again, it sounds rather abstract, but essentially means the following: that human beings are all on the same page because we're all quite rational. Because we all are working with the same foundational precepts, we all have the same understanding of things, we all have knowledge, it's not competing beliefs, we can have science that helps prove some things, other things, art that helps prove other things. That's freedom. This is freedom in the very traditional Western sense. Somewhat traditional. Does that, just real quick, does that ring true to you guys? Does that sound like maybe there's something to it? Okay. I'm going to attempt to show you guys that there's nothing to that through these thinkers. That in fact, it's a very, I would say, dangerous way of understanding freedom and understanding, the purpose of human existence, you might say. Snap tax. Joking. We're not in class. Okay, so this brings me to another thinker named Martin Heidegger. Is there a clock anywhere in this art gallery? This lovely art gallery? Let me grab my phone so I don't go overtime here, which I am known to do.
222. 222? This is wild.
Yeah, I'll have you guys know something. I went back and listened to Kaylin Scoggins' contribution to the lecture series last semester, and I made a brilliant joke, and nobody laughed except for Kai, and then he immediately stopped laughing because he was like, oh, nobody's laughing. So I appreciate you, Kai. I wish you would have stuck with me. But the point being is this, I said it before, I'll say it again, I don't know the difference between real laughter and fake laughter, so just give me laughter, we'll be okay. All right, let's move on to Heidegger. Perfect. He's got it, take notes. I'm rather fond of Heidegger. He has something of a checkered past biographically. He was a member of the Nazi Party. Not to say that he necessarily held those beliefs, but he was philosophizing, just maybe wrong place, wrong time. Although, even that itself is questionable. I bring this up for the following reason, is that Heidegger is going to offer us the beginning of an antidote, the beginning of a solve, so to speak, a solvent for this notion of progress, for this notion that the individual is subordinate to some greater cause. Heidegger is going to argue that the individual existence is subordinate to nothing. And in fact, to even believe in such a thing as progress, where one day human beings will be completely enlightened and will reach this notion of absolute knowledge, is already dead in the water, because that's, for Heidegger, as we're going to see, that's not what knowledge is. He's going to say that the individual experience is irreducible to some more general understanding of things. That the essence of, generally speaking, existence itself lies in the individual particularity and context of each person, of each individual human. And so to try to claim that there's such a thing as absolute knowledge is to suggest that you can have perfect knowledge of every single person's individuality, and that's just not how it is. You cannot separate individual person experience from what Hegel wants to call just experience, or just the human project or history. That's what Heidegger contends. Can I get that next slide? Thanks. Okay, so Heidegger offers us the beginnings of a postmodern existentialist conception of freedom, where he begins to do something of a rather difficult nature. He begins to separate or investigate the difference between, and this will sound familiar to some of my old students, facts and values. So up there, Heidegger is saying, here's that quote I selected: interpretation is not the acquiring of information about what is understood. It is rather the working out of possibilities projected in understanding. So Heidegger is up to something at the time was revolutionary, and I would say it's still pretty revolutionary, although he abandons the project. He wants to get at the essence of being. Grab a seat. Big question, the essence of being, with a capital B. He wants to know, what are the salient features, what are the absolute essentials to beingness as such? Big question. What is being? Pretty big question. He begins to investigate that by trying to figure out, well, let me look at how different things be. Let me look at the beingness of different objects. How are they? How are they being? How do they is? Stuff like that. And he decides, well, different objects, different things have different modes of being. They are in the world in a certain way. And he says, well, let's look at human beings. How do human beings be? What is our mode of being? And he says, and Jean-Paul Sartre, at whom we'll be looking in a moment, concurs. He says that human beings exist. Our mode of being, the way a human being bees, is not the way that a chair bees or the microphone bees in the world. Human beings exist. And the reason we exist is for the following. We are born tabula rasa. We're born a blank slate. We are not born, and this is what Heidegger contends, we're not born into any sort of human nature. We're not born into any sort of more general concept that unites us more fundamentally than our individuality. He says you're born as nothing. And what ends up happening over time, and we've all been kids, so we know what happens, is that we begin to, as very impressionable young sponges, we begin to conflate facts and values. Oh, that's funny. I just got the confirmation email that Brazos is available today. Okay, we'll edit that. There's no cameraman there, he left, he went to lunch. The idea is this. They're laughing because it's true, folks. Shout out RLC AV production. The thing with being so impressionable and conflating facts with values is that you begin to think that you are a certain way, and that's just the way you are. You know what I mean? So if you're reared in an environment where, particular ideas of how to behave and sort of cultural values in general are kind of being given to you, explained to you as though they're facts. So it might be like, the sky is blue, and, picking on your brother is wrong. And, Salsa dancing is not valuable, but going to law school is valuable. You should try to do that. As a sort of young, developing adolescent, you're not making the distinctions between, yeah, the sky is blue, we can prove that, but salsa dancing isn't as valuable as going to law school. You can't really, those aren't facts, those are interpretations. Interpretations are values. And this is where Heidegger begins to open up a new way of understanding what a human being is. A human being is that which creates. A human being is that which decides for itself what is valuable. It takes the facts, and then it judges the facts, it evaluates them based upon to what extent they mean anything to the individual. So again, interpretation is not merely just receiving data, receiving information, and now we're all on the same page. No. Interpretation is far more subtle, far more nuanced. Because when you are interpreting something, when you're valuing something, you're doing it based upon choices, decisions that you've made, or maybe that were made for you, of what is and is not worth your time. Worth your time pursuing, worth your time studying, worth your time advocating for. Freedom comes when a human being begins to realize that everything that is meaningful in the world is not necessarily so. That meaning in the world is not already there waiting for us. That value has not been determined like, 2 + 2 = 4 has been determined, and you just have to accept that. Values are not facts like that. Values depend upon your own individual pursuits, your own projects, as you project into the future the kind of life you want to have, the kind of person you want to be. That's where Heidegger is suggesting freedom ultimately lies, potentially. It lies in, again, the individual existing. So first you're born into this world, you're given a set of circumstances, here's the values, here's the tradition, you've inherited it, you're walking around with these values, you're walking around this tradition. Is it yours or not? That's it. I'll see you later. A third of the audience just left. So yeah, it's less about freedom as this somehow driving force that has been propelling humanity forward, progressive throughout the beginning of history. It's not that. Freedom becomes something much more radically individual, such that you are free to pursue things of your own accord. And we'll start there. So let's build upon that idea. What's the next slide? Okay, so this is the Hermeneutic Circle, it's called. Hermeneutics is just another term for interpretation, right? It comes from the Greek word Hermes, or Greek god, I should say. You guys ever hear Hermes? No? He's got the wings on his feet, because his job is to take messages from the gods in ancient Greek culture, fly down from Mount Olympus, and translate the gods' message in human terms, and then the humans make a wish or whatever, and Hermes flies back up and interprets the human terms in divine terms. He's interpreting. That's why hermeneutics is the interpretation of things like this. Now, this is just how we interpret. Pretty straightforward, more so than it actually looks. So, it says here, the Hermeneutic Circle illustrated the ways of interpreting and understanding something by moving back and forth from specific to general, etc. It's cyclical in the following way. You are a human being that has a past, that has a history, you've had experiences, you have an individual identity of some sort, to what extent you've fashioned it yourself varies, but you have a life, you have a sense of who you are and what you value. You then encounter something. We're in an art gallery. Let's say you walk up and take a look at one of the works of art. That work of art, that object, also has a history. Also has, again, something that it's putting out there. It's bringing in a provocative image or maybe a narrative summary to the table. So the two objects, you and the work of art, you engage in dialogue, you come together, you engage in a conversation in that way, where you try to better understand something about the work, given what the work is capable of providing to you with its past. Right? How does a work of art have a past? Well, it is what it is because of certain sensibilities found in artistic movements, because of what the artist herself wanted to portray, made those decisions. There's a lot going on. Such it is with human beings. So two human beings might come together and talk about something like art, and I share my experience. And then you share your experience, and then your experience changes my perception of the thing. So now I go back and look at the work of art, and I see it differently. Is it the same work of art? No, it's not, because it means something else to me now. It's different than it was before. Because of me, because I allow it to be meaningful, because I allow it room to reveal itself to me. This is kind of what freedom's going to be about. For Heidegger and for Sartre as well, the freedom you have to decide for yourself what is and is not valuable to you. We good so far? Throwing a lot at y'all. Let me see that next one, please. Yes, and so this is ultimately the goal of experience in this way. It seeks, Hermeneutic Circle, seeks to bring to the essence of a lived experience an interpretative, descriptive text that continues to acknowledge the complexity of that experience. Yeah, another way to put it would be this. When you are attempting to refine your tastes, when you're attempting to, we'll just say, come to learn about something that you care to learn about because you like it or you're interested in it or whatever the case is, you begin to understand just how nuanced, how deep, how rich something is. It could be a work of art, it could be a song, it could be a film, it could be another person, it could be yourself, anything. You begin to get an understanding of just how highly contextual meaning becomes. I think the ultimate point to bring alive here is the following. Going back to the fact-value dichotomy, is that nothing means anything. The world is meaningless, always has been, always will be, according to these thinkers. So of course, where does meaning come from then? It comes from you. You're the source of meaning. All meaning finds its source in human beings, because that is what a human being, that's how we be, that's what it means to exist. You freely decide for yourself what is and is not meaningful. And you might say, well, what if somebody else is arguing against me? I say it's meaningful, they say it isn't. I want to go major in interpretive dance, and your parents say, that's not very meaningful work, we're not paying for your tuition, something like that. You then get to decide for yourself whether or not you value their values, whether or not you value their judgments of your values. It's still up to you. So we're beginning to see how freedom might manifest itself from this more subjective sense. And subjective is a bit of a misleading term. More of a, what we'll say, individual sense. Next, please. Okay, so this is kind of just summing up everything in a nutshell here. That German term, Sein und Zeit, is the title of his most major book. It's called Being and Time. Right? So in Sein und Zeit, Heidegger rejects Cartesian attempts to build solid foundations for knowledge and consciousness. Now again, that's okay. They're rioting. It's like this, ladies and gentlemen. Hegel was very much of the persuasion here. Now again, this is Heidegger, so I'm comparing it to the last guy. Of the idea that conscious awareness can only come to know itself through living over a long period of time, such that human consciousness evolves. Heidegger, once again, is much more individualistic. And I don't mean that in necessarily a selfish way. There's no negative connotation there. He's simply stating, this is how we operate. To develop freedom in terms of consciousness is to understand what consciousness does for you, what it is, maybe even why we have it. I'm going to go into that with much greater detail with the next thinker. Next slide. Well, actually, you know what? Let me finish off those last two real quick, just so we're clear. Okay, the subject is Dasein, being there, determined by the world. Our relationship to the world is through understanding in immediate practical sense, and the Hermeneutic Circle, experience of all meaning from projection. So yeah, that's just it. When you go up to meet somebody, maybe for the first time, or you're going up to a work of art that's caught your attention, you are projecting onto that thing. You're saying, here's what I have an understanding of when it comes to art. I think art is silly, but I also want to get more into it, and I'm going to give it a shot, and this kind of looks like something I'd like. You have all of these things you're ascribing to the work. Just like you might have all of those ideas that you're ascribing to somebody else if you heard something about that person before you've actually met them. And it goes both ways. People they have understandings of who you might be, projections of who you might be. And then when the two come together and engage, again, your understanding, your perception, your awareness of what that other person is, who that other person is, it changes. It deepens. And what's most important is this. Human beings, by our very autonomy, we're free to change ourselves whenever we want. That's what it is to be free in this sense. So even if you think you know a lot about a person, who's to say that that person will remain that way forever? People aren't objects. People always change. The reason they always change, presumably, most of the time, is because you have that built-in capacity to do so. Because you have this inclination to provide yourself with meaning and then provide yourself with an identity through those meanings as you pursue them in projects out here in the world with other like-minded individuals. Interesting. Interesting. So, before we move on, let me just state one more thing. What does Hegel's understanding of freedom actually look like in real time? And then I'll compare it to Heidegger's. It's something like this, frankly. We establish certain institutions, like education systems, and then individual colleges within those systems. This is one example. And then those institutions are there for you to freely pursue your projects through in such a way where you are embodying what he calls Sichtlichkeit, happiness. It's very institutional. It's very much homogeneous. Everybody's on the same page with what is and is not valuable. Heidegger's, because it's interpretive, is not like that. It's very possible to not be on the same page with many people, and vice versa. The question is, whose values win out? Well, we'll take a look. The answer is, it's not a competition. Next. Oh yeah, that's just a work that Heidegger's written many works. This one, the Hermeneutics of Activity, is, I would say, my personal favorite. It's a very, very early work. But he really gets at everything I'm talking about here in that one in particular. And if you're in my learning community this semester, if you're taking Cultures of Intolerance and the Facts of Freedom with me this semester, we'll be looking at that book. Thank you. Too little, too late. Next one. Okay, what is going on with the font here? Okay, so this is, again, a breakdown of just what the existential impulse is here. You know what? Let's skip that one. We gotta move quickly. Next one. Basically, I'm just telling you what I skipped there is nothing that I haven't already discussed, which is again the idea that freedom itself is very much based upon these two polarities of having to choose and having a past. This idea of facticity is rather interesting. It's kind of articulated through this. So take a look at this here. So we're going to get into Jean-Paul Sartre, who is a contemporary of Heidegger, very much aligned in terms of what they think philosophy is, what they think freedom is, what they think life is. So it says here, Sartre introduces being and nothingness, his single greatest articulation of his existential philosophy as an essay in Phenomenological Ontology. It is a study of the consciousness of being. Ontology means the study of being. So again, another way to put it would be the following. How do human beings be? They exist. Now, to what extent does that make us free or limit our freedom? Well, again, in the following way. You have to choose. This is kind of the overriding feature in this text, is that no matter how badly you want it or don't want it, because you are a human being, you have this freedom, you must make decisions based on your own life. Heidegger has this notion of anxiety. He says anxiety is what human beings experience when they feel as though they're not doing well in life. It's not like fear, which is tied to individual objects and then goes away. It's something that stays with you. Because human beings, we care about ourselves. We care about our lives. We are the only creatures whose life is an issue for us. Where we, again, I use this example in class. Your dog doesn't sit around and go, geez, I wonder how my life's going. Doesn't seem like it's going very well. Your cat isn't like, man, I'm not really catting well today. I'm not being a good cat. No, only humans do that. Only humans sit back and go, am I being human? Am I living? But we don't put it like that, of course. We say other things. We say, am I happy? Are things going my way? Is this the kind of life I want to be leading? Am I the person I want to be? Those are the questions we ask. And therein lies the root, so to speak, of our freedom. If you begin to feel this kind of anxiety, Heidegger, Sartre, they both say the same thing. That's an indication that you aren't living your life. It's called bad faith, when you pretend that you're less free than you really are. When you pretend like you're more of an object than a human. The reference here is being and nothingness. Being and nothingness is Sartre's major existentialist work. The nothingness is consciousness. So human beings, we are a nothingness. Because, again, we are not yet finished becoming whatever it is we will become. And I don't mean that in terms of, yeah, you were born a human and maybe you'll become a unicorn. That's not what I mean. I mean in terms of individually who you are, what you want to do, what you want to devote your life to, with the freedom to change it and devote your life to something else. This is more existential freedom, where your freedom is itself being determined by you as you're exercising it. So human beings are free to create. We're free to create values, and because your life is determined by what you value, you're free to create yourself. That's what freedom is, in this particular way. It's very different from freedom in terms of something like, oh, we're free to die in a genocide because human consciousness is progressing. Very different. So far, so good. Which freedom sounds more appealing to you? Great, thanks. Okay, so continuing. Is this class? Continuing. The idea then becomes, well, how do I maximize my nothingness? How do I maximize my freedom? And again, it's in the following. It's remembering that at all times, you are free to do and become whatever you will. Whatever your will allow for. That's choice, that's autonomy. The downside of that, of course, is that as a human being, you got no choice. You have to do so, you have to be someone. You can't not choose. You could say, I'm just going to exist as a couch potato, man. I'm just going to be. That's still a choice. I choose not to choose. That's still a choice. You're choosing not to be. Well, here's the thing. When you do that, you're choosing not to be you. You're choosing not to be human. Your beingness is being undermined by your very existence. I'm going to say that again. Your beingness is being undermined by your very existence. Because a human being bees insofar as a human being chooses and creates values and projects for itself. And when you make those choices, you are existing. So if you choose not to choose, you're using your existence to undermine what you are. It's an interesting paradox. Fascinating. Still not quite freedom, though. This is all, I got the script in front of me, people. This is all off the top. This is, every lecture you've ever heard of mine has been a freestyle. That's not, we edit that out too. Oh, who's that guy? Ladies and gentlemen, my father, show me. This is Jean-Paul Sartre. This is, it's not a flattering photo of him, but most photos aren't too flattering of the guy. Next one. I can keep ripping off that one. Next one. Here's a more distinguished picture of the guy. Look at him. Before there were hipsters, there were existentialists. Okay, so it says, this is just a brief, I'll let you guys read this on your own, just a few things about him there. Then go down a bit. Existence precedes essence. We have no nature. We become who we are through our choices of moral responsibility. Yeah. Existence precedes essence is the bumper sticker slogan of existentialism. That's like, if you know anything about existentialism, that's what you know. Existence precedes essence. What does that mean? Everything I've already discussed. That first you exist, first you're born, and then because you're born a nothing, because you're born completely blank, a blank slate, you then have to rot your essence. You're here, and then you get to choose what is essential to who you are as an individual. Your existence comes first, and then your essence comes later. But here's the thing. The essence, if you want to use it this way, the essence of human beings is that they have no essence. Their essence is to create themselves as frequently or infrequently as you choose, and then bearing the weight of responsibility that comes with making choices. Sartre is also very clear. He says, you are, as an individual, as a human being who lives in a world that is inherently meaningless, and we'll throw the rest in here too. There's no God, there's no afterlife, that's what they think. All of the responsibility on how life turns out lies on you. And what's more, you're responsible for people that you've never met. You're responsible for people you'll never meet, you'll never know. But if you've in some way impacted them, even incidentally, butterfly effect style, you're still responsible for that. So again, it's easy for me to sit up here and say, hey, freedom is doing what you want when you want to do it because you're free and we're human and yay. But what does that really amount to? Well, it amounts to actually a lot of responsibility. Because if somebody comes up to you and says, let's say it's your parents, and they say, listen, I value education, your education, I also value me taking a family vacation. So I value your education, I value vacation. I've decided to put what little money we have in your education if you do exactly what I tell you to do when you're in school. Right? I want you to take these classes, I want you to get this major, this is what I have planned for you. And you say to yourself, well, I want to go to school, I want an education, I'd rather do that than, go on a family vacation, or maybe you wouldn't, who knows. But let's say for the sake of argument you do want to go to school, then you have to say to yourself, and ultimately to your parents or whomever, I value education too, Dad, but I don't value what you want me to major in. I value something else. And I'm not going to go to school if I can't major in what I want to major in. So you are asserting your values against your father's, and you're free to do that, but just bear in mind there will be consequences. And are you willing to live with them? That's freedom and responsibility. So it's not just that you're wildly free. Because you're so very free, you are so very responsible for everything that has anything to do with you or things that even are associated with you. At no point in time are you allowed to make excuses for yourself. It's a very uncompromising understanding of freedom here, where your freedom is the exercise of your beingness. Now again, keep in mind, people like Heidegger and Sartre, especially Heidegger, most especially Heidegger, they're trying to figure out what beingness is, and so looking at the human being is just one answer to that question. So everything bees, all there is beingness. This is just how one of the beings be. They exist. Sartre is going to get even more pointed. So down there it says, we are born into existence, and I read that. Next one, bad faith. When people are too terrified of freedom and responsibility of choices, they retreat to old existing norms. Bad faith, I'll say it one last time. Bad faith is simply pretending that you're less free than you are. When you make decisions in what he calls bad faith, you're trying to treat yourself like you're an object, like you're not free, like you lack, it's going to sound funny, like you lack nothingness. What makes a human being free is the fact, again, that we're incomplete, that we're not full. Heidegger, Sartre say other objects, they're full. They're full in and of itself. This is a phone, this is all it can ever be, this is all it's going to be. It can't say, I want to be a plasma flat screen television. It can't. It's never going to, it's done. This is what it is. It's complete. It's final. It's full. Human beings aren't. We're not full. We lack. There's a nothingness to us. And that nothingness is precisely our ability to decide for ourselves what we want to do. So we are incomplete, and that is a blessing. When you wish that you didn't have so much freedom, when you do everything in your power to avoid freedom, that's when you're in bad faith. When you make excuses, when you pretend like your actions aren't your responsibility, that's bad faith. I'll give you an example. I use this example all the time. Professor Manzi, why did you walk to the back of the class and beat that student to death? And I say, Well, what do you want me to do? I'm Italian. I got a temper. I have no choice. That's what happens. Italians do that sort of thing. I'm an Italian, not my fault. Blame my heritage. See, that's bad faith. That's me not taking responsibility for my individual existence, my individual actions. I'm blaming on something about me, about where I come from, about the kind of person that maybe my family members are, and I'm like, well, I'm like them. You know, you make excuses, you behave like a child. Cool. Yeah, and so that's what being in nothingness looks like, if you've seen the textbook. I have the PDF uploaded to our class, but that's what the actual book looks like. Being and nothingness. Again, our beingness is our nothingness. That's the key to that title. The way we be is through our nothingness. We are nothing. And you know, that means we can decide what thing we will be. All right, next one. How am I doing on time here? Caramba. All right. Okay, so the next one, what is going on here? Okay, well, it says freedom at the top. You can see that. Okay, freedom, any situation in which one finds oneself of one's own creation. Therefore, one creates his own world by supplying the meanings, the interpretations, the significance for things and events. Since the world is the product of my choice, and that was intentional, I'm emphasizing, and I alone bear responsibility for the world. You and you alone bear responsibility for the entire world. That's what this is suggesting here. Because, again, when things happen, when you hear about things, you hear about people starving in distant lands, it has no direct impact on you personally in your life, but because you hear about it, you're going to have a response, and you are responsible for that response. Your responsibility is your responsibility. Does that make sense? All right, mind blown. Next one. Just a further elaboration of bad faith. Again, according to Sartre, bad faith is true even to those of us who believe that our meaning is given to us. And so again, if meaning is given to you, it means it's not created by you. I want to make sure this is clear. Sartre and Heidegger aren't saying that you need to create all meaning. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that, look, you're born into a world where meaning has already been created. Other people who've come before you have created values, and they've created rituals and religions that circulate around these values. And, you know, they're already there waiting for you. Your freedom comes in depending whether or not you want to, deciding, I should say, whether or not you accept those values, you agree with those values. And you begin to individuate yourself from what everybody else thinks, or what most people maybe think. Or you ask yourself, why are these the values that everybody I know holds? And then when you really take a close look at them, maybe you say, you know what, I do like these. This is me, I'm feeling this, I'm going to be this. And that's good, you've exercised your freedom, even though you're just being traditional. But those beliefs now, they're self-possessed. You've decided of your own accord that you will, again, acquiesce to these values, promote these values. Or you decide not to. Okay, so if you ever feel like that's not a possibility, if anybody ever says to you in your life, you have to do this, they are in bad faith. Because you don't. You don't have to do anything. If you're my students, do not come to me with that, and you invariably miss the deadline. Okay. Yeah, let's keep it going. Next slide. I said I'd wrap up by 3. I haven't even gotten to Nancy yet. That's the title of my presentation. Okay, so authenticity is just a corollary to bad faith. So these thinkers will argue that there are 2 ways of existing, authentically or inauthentically. And as you might guess, inauthentically existing is another way of being in bad faith. You're living as though you're not aware that one day you're going to die. And so you're living as though people are, finite. That the people that you know, there's only a few things about them, and that's all there is to them, and so you just operate upon that understanding. You believe that values aren't up to you. You kind of just go about your life not realizing that you're mortal, and one day, literally at any second, it could end. At any second right now, you could suffer a massive brain aneurysm and die. That's true 100% of the time. How often do we think about that? they would say, well, that's living inauthentically. Not a bad thing. There's no negative connotation to that, but just that's how we are. We live as though, our biggest concerns are really just small. Authenticity is making decisions in light of the fact that you will die one day. As you might imagine, being mindful of that is going to affect your opinion on things, your values, your choices. So it says over here, the opposite of bad faith, in Sartre's prescription, he's a doctor, is what he calls authenticity. Authenticity is not the same thing as good faith, which as Sartre understands it, is just another way to abandon yourself to a transcendent meaning. He's picking on believers, people who are in good faith. He's saying that's just bad faith. Instead, living authentically requires the nothingness at the heart of our existence, taking it seriously. This requires us to live as freedom, accepting full responsibility for the meaning in our lives. Of course you're fully responsible for your life, because you decide what is meaningful in your life and what isn't. You get to decide that. It might sound crazy, but you do have that freedom. I think, what was the example that came up? What was the example that came up in class today? It was like, if a student suddenly suffers an untimely death, the parent doesn't have to care. You're free not to. That's how radically free this is. I would recommend. Oh yeah, you're the student. Hey, you're undead, reanimated. It goes that deep. Now the likelihood of that happening, you could argue, is minimal, because you're raised in most people are raised in an environment where you value family and life, and especially the lives of your children. But it's possible. It's possible. I mean, on a lower level, you could say parents put themselves before their kids all the time. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's your prerogative, and that's the whole point here, is that it's your prerogative how you live. Now, let's see that next one. Meaningless but free. As defined by nothingness, our existence is meaninglessness. Our existence is meaningless until we give it meaning. And existing is giving meaning, or it's agreeing with somebody else's meaning, or whatever the case is. It means changing your mind about what you thought something meant. You're free to do all these things. This is how we're artists. This is how human beings create. We're artisans of our lives, we create values. Yes, so we are thus absolutely free. We find ourselves in the world with qualities, capacities that we are not the source of. Still, we are not passive bearers of said qualities. They have the significance we afford them, we allow them. So again, one thing might mean something to somebody else, it might mean nothing to the other person. Is there a right or wrong there? No, because values aren't facts. They're interpretations. Next one, please. That really translates well to the big screen. That's supposed to be an old Sartre. I said Sartre, not fart, although he is both, perhaps. He says, I am free. Now, I do not have the slightest reason for living. That's, believe it or not, an optimistic statement. He's celebrating that. Do you know why? Yeah, he doesn't have a reason to live. That means he gets to make one. It's an opportunity. Our freedom, our negation, our nothingness, those are all really good things, you could say. They're what make us human. They're what allow us to be free. It's a good thing the world is meaningless, because otherwise we would just be walking around fulfilling obligations. There'd be no creativity. There'd be no attempt at becoming who you are. There'd be no freedom to develop your own personal identity and then revise it and then revise it or not. None of that would be attained. None of that would be possible. We would all be objects. We'd all be in ourselves. And that's what Hegel, I think, wants. At least according to Heidegger and Sartre. All right, next one, please. Narrative identity takes part in the story's movement and the dialectic between order and disorder. This is just a brief aside, and I want to spend really any time on it. This is how you become who you are. This is how individual personal identities form. is through the order and the disorder. The disorder of the chaos of your life finds its adhesive, finds its coherence, its cohesiveness through the values, through the projects. So life might seem really random, but what makes it sync up? What makes it a cohesive whole? It's you, but not just you like you're some object. It's you as you're living, as you're existing and choosing which paths to follow. No one's forcing you to do that. You become somebody. You say to yourself, I value, again, salsa dancing, I want to be a salsa dancer. That's not all I want to be, but that's something I want to be. And then you pursue it. So you take dance classes and you go to practice. So you have to drive to Dallas, then you have to drive to Garland, and then you have to drive to Richardson. This is what your life becomes. You're doing all of these things, spending all this time because you've freely chosen to pursue something that means something to you, even if it doesn't mean anything to anybody else. It doesn't have to. You don't need a certain number of humans to say something's meaningful. You just need one. Okay. Next one, please. Yeah, we are our choices. I mean, that's as straightforward as it gets. But here's just it. If you're not allowed to make choices, then what are you? They'll say you're not human. A human being has to be free to make choices. I'll save questions till the end. So then what does this mean for things like good and evil and, a great life and a crappy life? It means the following. If you are in any way being forced to do things that you would rather not do, then you're being oppressed. That's evil according to existentialism. Anytime you're being robbed of your humanity by not being free to pursue your own projects, your own values, you're not free. Now you can say, well, little children aren't free to choose their own values, so are they not free? Yeah, they're not free. They're also not fully human yet. They haven't grown in maturity to the point where they can make decisions rationally, with cognizance of other things in life. And so, yeah, they're not. But when you treat human beings like objects, like children, you really are oppressing them. I think that's the bottom line here, because of this very quote, because you are your freedom, you are your choices, and therefore you are responsible for them. You're responsible for making them, you're responsible for testifying to them. So this is freedom now. This is, again, a very existential, hyper-individualist understanding of freedom. Different from Hegel. Heidegger kind of paved the way. Sartre really presents it in rather radical terms. Can I see that next one, please? Yes. And he says we always choose the good. That's some cartoonish characterization of Sartre. He's got his coffee, he's got his mescaline. He's known for doing a lot of both. And he's smoking his cigarettes. What a cool dude. Très chic. Sartre. Why do we always choose the good? I mean, that's kind of tongue-in-cheek. There is no such thing as the good. Good, evil, right, wrong, those terms no longer hold weights, at least not objectively. You trying to sneak out of here? Where have you got to be that's more important than this? That's not more important than this. All right, I'll see you later. Well, getting back to it then, it's entirely ensnared in the idea that you are going to do the things, you're going to pursue the projects that mean the most to you. And so to you, they're good, they're beneficial. And so you always choose what is most meaningful, it would seem. That's just how choices work. That's why you choose one thing over the other, because you give one, you grant one greater significance. So, in other words, nobody's really choosing, you could say, to undermine their own goals or projects. Giving you some sort of limitation to choice here. Okay, let me see that next one. Whoa! Ladies and gentlemen, my mother, no, this is Jean-Luc Nancy. This is the philosopher that I want to bring to your attention now. Jean-Luc Nancy is a very, he is to existentialism what existentialism is to everything else. Maybe that's a good way to put it. And again, this guy's alive today. He's teaching, 1,500 miles from here right now. Living, breathing philosopher, folks. He looks like the Raging Cajun. Do you guys know that? No, you guys are all too young. Never mind. He's a political talking head. Okay, whatever. Next one. That's what he looks like, folks. Yes. Here's his book. This is the book that I'm utilizing in my learning community this semester. The Experience of Freedom. Maybe one of the best things I've read since I first read Sartre. And I just recently started reading this only a few months ago. Probably shouldn't say that because my learning community was prepped many months ago. But anyways, this is his work here. He's written many works. This is the one that I want to focus on. This is where he takes freedom and its existentiality and kind of does something even trickier with it. So move on, please. Radical freedom, keep off the grass. Yes. So here's what I want to talk about with regards to Jean-Luc Nancy, and then I'll take questions. And I'm already over my portion here. Yeah, give me 5 more minutes on this, guys, and then I want to hear what you have to say. Now, Jean-Luc Nancy has a problem with Heidegger and Sartre and their understanding of freedom. They say that ultimately, Heidegger, Sartre, Nancy says this, Heidegger and Sartre, they are still not getting at what freedom is. That their notion of freedom is still, it's shaded, it's hued, it's subordinated to something greater. And for Heidegger, you could say, well, notions of freedom are not what's essential. Freedom is kind of just one aspect of being. So really, the focus is on how we be, the various modes of our being. And you can make the same charge to some degree with Sartre, and that's in fact what Nancy does. Now, Nancy wants to introduce an even more radical version of freedom than radical freedom. Next one, please. Singularity. Has anybody ever heard of this term before? Okay, a couple people. I think it's notorious in more science fiction conversations, as well as some maybe heavy natural science conversations. Yeah, but I'm going to use it in a different way here, as Nancy does. Now, you saw the idea of radical freedom. Again, what radical freedom means is that, again, you are exceptionally free. You are free to do so much. You are free to even do things like create meaning, and that is how you be. So the meaning, the freedom to create meaning is within, ensconced underneath this idea of being. Nancy wants to say, well, that's not really radical freedom. It's relative freedom. It's freedom relative to the way in which you be and the way in which you become. So freedom serves being in the kind of way that progress served freedom for Hegel. Do you see that? It's almost like freedom, as much as Heidegger and Sartre want to say freedom is at the core of their philosophy, and it is, again, Nancy's going to say, well, no, I mean freedom of a different sort. I mean, what he wants to say is truly radical freedom, and here's the following. Here's what he means by singularity and radical freedom. True freedom is not being beholden to anything, conceptually, metaphysically, practically even, for the most part. True freedom has to be something that is impossible to categorize. It is very much a spontaneous initial rupture into experience. For Heidegger and for Sartre, it's the condition for experience. I mean, your freedom is what allows you to experience life as humans do. Be as human beings are. With Nancy, freedom is something much more along the lines of this singularity, where true freedom must be completely unique, hyper-individual, completely almost novel relative to your world. And as soon as that freedom begins to seep its way into categories, associations, relationships, your relation to, not only like human relationships, but just your relationship to various dimensions of the world, then it becomes stratified, it becomes codified, it becomes in the service of it becomes an example of being and not freedom itself. Real radical freedom almost means never knowing it. Because as soon as you know it in other terms, and it's no longer radically free. It's a relative freedom. So real freedom, he wants to say, doesn't come necessarily from living in this existential way. Real freedom is almost out of our control to some extent. Real freedom is having absolutely no relationship to cause and effect, to past and future. No sort of network whatsoever. It's spontaneous, it bursts onto the scene, it's fresh, and it will never be like that again. Anytime you see things kind of repeating themselves in kind or essence, you don't really have freedom anymore. You have a category. And so the charge here is that existentialists, they put everything under the category of beingness. And Nancy says, no, I want to put freedom first. Let me see that next one, please. Fate, destiny, life. Now, before I get into destiny, I think that term has a lot of different connotations. And so I'll just say the following. That destiny seems like the opposite of freedom, right? If you're destined to do something, if you're fated to do something, it's almost like it's out of your control. That's your destiny. There are plenty of novels and movies that are about people fighting their destiny. Look, Star Wars, Luke Skywalker. He resists his destiny because he doesn't want to do it, like an existentialist. But then he eventually capitulates and says, well, this is my destiny. It's like Neo in The Matrix, where, what is it? Mr. Smith manifests in the subway, and the people are watching him. They're like, he's not running away. He's going to try to fight Mr. Smith. He's accepting what he was always destined to become. And, we could talk about Lord of the Rings on that, I guess. But here's the idea. Existentialist philosophy would seem to be at odds with destiny. No, you're free to write your own destiny. Destiny seems prescriptive. It seems not in control. It seems like something that you have to deal with, not something you decide for yourself. That sounds right, but Nancy's saying no. As a matter of fact, Heidegger himself is also subject to this idea of destiny because both Heidegger and Sartre contend that your life is going to go a certain way. These are the various, again, they're called existentiales. There are different aspects of what it is to be a human being and to be free, but you're always free in the same way. And if you're always free in the same way, is it really radical freedom? If we all have the same kind of freedom? Can you really call that true freedom? Or is it more just freedom is a piece of just what it is to be human? And then it's almost like maybe we are back with Hegel. Well then, what would radical freedom actually look like then? Well, it would be something like this. You make a decision for yourself. And it's almost like you throw caution to the wind. It's almost like you acknowledge that what happens isn't necessarily connected to anything else at all. And any connections you're seeing are just your interpretations. It's the connections you're putting together. They might not actually be there. And whether or not they're really there is almost beside the point. If you perceive connections via how you interpret a situation, then there's a connection to be made. But it's not inevitable. See, destiny implies inevitability. It implies, again, something like coercion almost. You're destined to choose. You're condemned to be free. That sounds like destiny. That sounds like a lack of freedom. And Nancy's like, yeah, damn straight it is. How can we say that freedom is the root of existence when all of these existentialists are simply claiming that, freedom is just how you be? That we're just describing being. We're not describing freedom. Radical freedom for Nancy is a singularity. It's an absolutely unique thing. Period. Bereft of necessary causal connections, bereft of any connection you might be making as you're trying to put together your life in a cohesive whole. When you try to ask yourself who you are and you try to give yourself an answer, your response usually is something like a narrative. It's a life story you tell yourself. And usually it's with reference to where you are in the here and now. You might say, so I value, why am I here right now? I value, listening to philosophy. And then you might ask yourself, well, why do I value listening to philosophy? And you'll look back on your individual distinct past, and you'll try to identify moments that inspired you towards philosophy, that brought you to an interest, that you developed and you deepened, and now you're here today right now, and that's how you understand it. And you call yourself philosophical, and all that stuff. And that's what existentialism preaches. And that's kind of how we do. That's what we do. We understand ourselves in terms of a narrative. However, again, Nancy's going to say, those connections you're making aren't factual. The facts of freedom, the fact of freedom is the following. It is entirely irreplaceable, irreparable, unrepeatable. It's unique. It is not the cause of something. It's not the effect of something. True freedom is understanding something in its, and when I say something, it could be an event, it could be an isolated incident, but it's understanding that thing just for sort of what it is. Your freedom then is less concerned with, for Nancy, trying to develop a life consisted of projects that you've freely chosen, strung out over a period of time until you die. Freedom is something even more difficult to articulate, because as soon as you start to articulate it, you're already totalizing it. You're already giving it characteristics that it need not have. Freedom resists all characterization. Radical freedom resists all description, all method. It is singular, it is unique. It is the ethos of individuality. And even talking about it undermines it, because I'm telling you something about it when it's free to be something else. How does that translate into our lives? Well, maybe we could talk about that. I'm wildly out of time here. But I'll say this. Perhaps in the following way. You come to recognize that certain moments that transpire, that occur in your life, that will never again reoccur in exactly the same way, and can never, because the circumstances were so unique to that situation. When those things happen, you look at them for what they are, almost like works of art, almost like artifacts, where the object is free to be associated with whatever it is you associate it with, and it's free to resist the associations you impinge upon it, given how other people use it. It's the most radical version of freedom I've ever come across. It's pretty amazing. I'm more concerned with taking questions. And can you go one more slide, please? I think that sums it up. For Heidegger, freedom belongs to being, and for Nancy, being belongs to freedom as singularity. So being is a manifestation of freedom, insofar as that is how we're characterizing that this time. One last one. Finally, here it is, folks. He calls it naked existence. Pure existence. Existence without artifice. This is a lengthy quote. Let's look at it right quick. Oh, don't let the quote scare you.
I know.
I'll see you later. I'm going to read this, and then we're going to talk about it. This is going to be the springboard for maybe some questions here. This is Nancy's not final response. This is his response. In and through ethical, juridical, material, and civil liberties, liberty means free, obviously, liberties, one must free that through which alone these liberties are, on the one hand, ultimately possible and thinkable, and on the other hand, capable of receiving a destination other than that of their immanent self-consumption, a transcendence of existence such that existence as existence in the world, which has nothing to do with any other world, transcends the essence that it is in the finitude in which it insists. Only a finite being can be free, and a finite being isn't existent. For the infinite being encloses the necessity of its freedom, which it seals to its being. It is therefore a question of nothing other than liberating human freedom from the immanence of an infinite foundation or finality, and liberating it therefore from its own infinite projection to infinity, where transcendence itself is transcended and hereby annulled. It is a question of letting freedom exist for itself. Freedom perhaps designates nothing more and nothing less than existence itself. That'd be funny if I turned around and everybody was gone. I was half expecting it. So again, a whole lot going on in that block quote. What is? Well, what does it? What does it all mean? I'll sum it up in the following sense. Freedom, as he understands it, naked existence is freedom being free. For lack of a better, it's kind of a poetic way to put it. But freedom needs to be free. Freedom cannot be tied down. It cannot be tethered or attached to other metaphysical, infinite, divine justifications for freedom. On the contrary. Sort of. Well, it's like this. Yeah, it is the source of being. I know it sounds weird, because you think the other way around. You have being, and then that gives rise to certain freedoms depending on the kind of object or person you are. thing you are. But in this case, it's like, look, anytime you try to justify freedom and you sort of graft freedom onto something else, like, you know, freedom is valuable because God gave it to us, or freedom is valuable because X or Y or Z or whatever the case may be. Progress, if you're Hegel, you're already chaining it. You're already encapsulating it, you're imprisoning it. Freedom, sheer naked experience, sheer naked freedom is freedom for its own sake, which is to say, free to be free freely. I'm Jeffrey. Manzi. Okay, guys. One last slide here, real quick. Okay. My freedom does not end where that of the other starts, but the existence of the other is the necessary condition to my freedom. Oftentimes we feel as though, again, we're only free within our designated zone, our personal space, what have you, and when somebody else has his own needs and obligations and whatnot, then we're no longer free. It's in fact not the case that in order for you to be free, you need other people. You're dependent on other people. Insofar as if you want to pursue your own projects, say you want to be a salsa dancer, well, you need other people. You need a dance partner. You need a teacher. You need places. You need discotheques, or whatever the case is. Salsa dancing venues. Okay, I'm fizzling out here. You get the point, is that other people allow you to be free. They don't oppress your freedom. They enable it. Because the more people you meet, the more objects and experiences you have and come across, the more opportunity freedom has to assert itself in never before seen singular ways, as is the way of freedom itself. Hit me one more time. Freedom. Heavy stuff, am I right? All right, guys, I'll open it up for Q&A. What time is it? Yeah, we got a solid 5.5 minutes of Q&A. No questions, okay. Well, I guess, oh, Uche, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask, what kind of society could you establish based off like these existentialist type of freedom? Because it seems like a society has to come to an agreement of what values it has. In America, we value life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But if someone values killing, that conflicts with the society. So how can you establish a society where everyone decides their own values?
It's a great question.
I think it's like socialization.
Okay, it's through socialization.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's like, I was thinking that same thing, and I don't think it could work. I don't think it could work. And I think,
it's a question.
I think that's the point.
Open
Honestly,
question.
is trying to make the person more individual, not tied down to the responsibilities of having civic duties or social duties or any duties to society, but only unto himself.
Yeah, I like how that sounds. That certainly sounds existential. Yeah, and you know, it's existential in tandem with other people, as you're saying, so you can live peacefully.
Peacefully. Can humanity flourish through existentialism?
Yeah, I figured as much. And look, that's the guiding question of my entire life. So far, no. I'm joking. The idea is this, guys, that, look, on the one hand, you had these existentialist thinkers that held certain political positions. They had their own thoughts on how a society should be. Again, Heidegger was a member of the Nazi Party. But you know, regardless of that, it suggests that he thought that there was a certain, perhaps, way that human beings could be sort of promoted in their existential authenticity. But of course, his understanding of that is very different from, say, Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a very outspoken Marxist, a socialist, communist, things along these lines. We have here in America a kind of, you know, weird democracy, I'll just say, where we're democratic, you know, for the most part, but we're also a capitalist society, so sometimes those two imperatives clash. Quite often they do, you might say. In that regard, is this an example of existential flourishing? Because Kai, what you're describing too, it sounds like it could be America, potentially. You have individuals pursuing their own passions, and if they're unable to do so themselves, there are apparatuses in place that allow you to do that. So if you want to pursue art history, but you can't afford to go to school, you can get scholarships, you get financial aid, so it allows you to be freer than you would be.
But there's some things where completely, I mean, I guess it would be the consequence of the action, but like, if someone's a pedophile, they can't pursue their passion.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so how are you free responsibly? Yeah, well, for the record, and I hate to say this, there are plenty of pedophiles who pursue their passion. That's unfortunate, obviously. But that still testifies to you, how free you are. Sartre says something very significant. He says you cannot escape your freedom.
Okay,
Even in suicide, you can't escape your freedom.
Okay, so
Because
it's
that's
like,
a decision.
So you're saying it's not like a suggestion on how to really, like, on how you ought to live, it's just a simple observation of the nature of reality?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It sounds like, yeah, very good.
Guiding you or telling you.
Yeah.
Saying, like, you could be a pedophile, you could pursue your passions. I wouldn't suggest it, but you could.
Yeah,
you
that-
have to face those consequences.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it builds on what you're saying, Uche. In other words, it's like this. A pedophile who engages in pedophilia might say when arrested, I can't help it. This is just what I am. I have these desires and I am subject to them. You know, alleviating himself of responsibility for heinous actions. The existentialist would say, no, you're in bad faith. Yeah, you have those desires, but you're free not to pursue them. And you have to make that value judgment. What do you value more? Sating your arguably perverted, not arguably, your perverted inclinations there? Or do you value more not risking everything? I mean, these are real decisions people make every day. Some people. And so I think that's what it is. It's not as though they're prescribing, here's what you should do. Here's how you should live. Sartre, Heidegger, they're not saying, be Heideggerian, be Sartrean. They're saying, you want to be Heideggerian? Be you. You want to be Sartrean? Do you. That's existential. And so again, it's not necessarily telling you exactly how to live. It's encouraging you to figure it out for yourself. Yeah.
What I'm trying to ask, sorry for pausing the question. I'm trying to ask is, can a society give each individual this amount of freedom and the society flourish? As in, can people have different values and still live cohesively? You
know, this is going to sound like a cop-out, but it depends on the values. You know, because as you brought up earlier, if people value, look, there are some people in a society where murder is illegal that say, well, we still value murder, we still think it's an effective tool. Let's continue to use it on the down low. I give you the mafia, you know. So it's, or I guess gangs, I suppose. So it's like any sort of action or liberty that society would tend to try to avoid or discourage or snuff out entirely. Because humans are invariably free, there's always the possibility of somebody making it manifest, doing it. And so given our society, and we are a pluralist, democratic society, you're free to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, religious liberty, etc. You're free to worship as you choose or choose not to do. It seems like we're doing it, but as you know, it's not necessarily a smooth ride.
But we also have laws.
We do have laws, but again, every individual has to ask himself or herself, do I really value these laws? Because here's the kicker, the laws aren't naturally valuable. Nothing's naturally valuable. That's why when you're a very young kid, you know, you get visited by, you know, the DARE officer, telling you at a very young age, don't value this stuff. You know what I mean? So, because could you? I guess. But they don't even want you to think that's a possibility. Existentialism is all about possibilities. And so one last note of that. There are some actions you shouldn't do because it eliminates the humanity of other people. Again, I talked about being oppressive in that way. So yeah, if you murder somebody, that person is no longer free to do anything, right? Because they're dead. But at the same time, you don't want to be murdered either. So you might think to yourself, well, I value my life. Presumably this person values his life the same way. You begin to cultivate empathy, and perhaps murder rates drop.
Doesn't that limit the freedom? Or doesn't that suggest that you should live this way and not that way?
No, it's the consequence, I think. I think it's a suggestion. I think it's more like this is the consequence of this lifestyle.
So we should do this, but not that.
Well, that's
the consequence.
You're both right. You're living the freedom because you are choosing to restrict it on yourself. So you're freely choosing to not allow yourself to do certain things. Like, you know, if you're on a diet or something and you choose to keep yourself from eating, I don't know, chocolate cake or something. It's like that.
If you choose that,
I want him to go. I really want him to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry, please.
I just wanted to comment that as far as the existentialists are concerned, they do, you know, you have the freedom to interpret things how you will. None of the serious philosophers out there actually argue that all interpretations are equal. So we're not saying that you are free to choose one path or another. They're not saying that they're all equal. They're going to value one thing over another.
The individuals who make the choices?
No, the choices themselves. I mean, they're not saying that all choices are equal. They say you're free to make the choice.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say, is that, yeah, all choices are equal in terms of capacity. Making choices is what makes you human. Now, are there better or worse choices? I think they are going to say, by and large, yes, but it depends on you. I mean, this is what I meant by the idea of absolute knowledge and its attainment, a la the Hegelian grand project, is ultimately unattainable. Because at the end of the day, what's right and wrong for you is going to be relative to your situation, to your context. So given what you espouse to value, there are practical ways of pursuing that. And so, yeah, you could say to yourself, I want to be a famous watercolor painter. And you make that decision, you truly value watercoloring, and then you could choose to go to school and do it, or you could choose to, I don't know, smoke crack and give it a shot, right? One choice is better than the other, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, I don't know, painting is valuable, or the person's choice is now legitimately set in stone. I mean, it's neither one of those things. So I think you can make descriptions, or rather discrepancies, based upon pragmatics. But yeah, no, so I think that's an important distinction. Thank you. Yeah?
I would say that freedom, in that sense, I would describe it as completely radical freedom. It's non-existent. It's an attempt to look outside of the box that we're within.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Essentially because a lot of the things that we are the very thought of choice is based upon preconceived notions. And
Yes.
so with that being the case, that's what it's kind of how it's.
Yeah, that's you got it, man. That's how it is. And that's why it's so difficult to talk about something like singularity, because words themselves are general things. You're using general symbols to talk about something that is completely unique. And as soon as you do that, you're making it less unique. I'm sorry, we got to go that way. Okay, I'll take one last. Any final points? Yeah.
Okay, I might just be reiterating my question over and over, but what I was trying to ask is, like, when societies come up with laws, basically everyone agreeing that this is something that we should do, this is something that we should value. So that's what a law could be. What I'm asking is there a society where the collective group does not come to an agreement upon what they should value? As in, you said, you gave the example of like two people coming together. I value my life, so this person probably values their life also, so we should agree not to kill each other. But is there a society where the governing body does not create these laws suggesting you what lives to live? Can a society like that exist?
You have a response to that? Yeah, I'll hear your response first.
I would say no, because the very idea of a society and the foundation of it is essentially restricted within the fact that it's a society, is that agreeing upon anything in and of itself is the lack of freedom.
Yeah, and so...
Yeah, it's like an obligation.
Yeah, there you go. But here's the thing. You could still be free and have obligations so long as you freely choose the obligations yourself, or if, given the obligation, you think about it and you agree with it. You're like, okay, I get it. I can go with this. But of course, again, the whole word obligation means doing something you don't want to do. So it is kind of odd. Uche, I'll say this about the likelihood of such a society existing. Because Jean-Paul Sartre asked the same question. He's wondering this. It would have to be a very unique kind of Marxism, I think you would say. But even that is very tenuous. Because, as you're rightly pointing out, well, first of all, and I think my colleague, Professor Scoggins, used this example in our class today, it's difficult enough to get four or five people to decide what they want on a pizza that they're going to share. Like, imagine trying to get 5 million people to decide on values that define their existence. It seems like it would take a great deal of, put it this way, everybody would have to be willing to be responsible and be really willing to hold their own feet to the fire, hold themselves in contempt when it comes to temptations of bad faith. But that kind of sounds like a utopia. So then what do we have left? So what's the point of this then? Existentialism can help you affect your personal freedom and investigate meaning in your situation, in your society, and become a more creative, critical thinker when it comes to assessing the values of those around you as well as your own repeatedly. Hey, thanks for coming, guys. Oh, well, yeah, that's it. I'm gonna let it go here because we're out of time. But thanks for having me. It's been great. I'm Jeff Manzi, philosophy department.